Hello and welcome to our third installment of Yoga Props. Why would I use them? Today we're going to be talking about blocks, foam blocks and cork blocks. And as always, it's nice to have a blanket handy as well. So our first block is a chip foam block. It's fairly dense, and I like to use a block with a cover on it to stop it from wearing and pilling and sticking to your pants, which kind of yucky. So a block cover is really nice. It makes your block last longer. So the number one thing that we use this block for is for sitting. So sometimes we come into a seated position and we cross our legs and we're just, it just doesn't feel good. My spine is rounded, my pelvis is tilted back, and I can't get to the place where I'd like to be more comfortable. If we take our block and tuck it under our seat, so not like a couch, because then we're in the exact same place, we're just higher. What we want to do is put it right under our sits bones. So those bony points in your bum, those are your sits bones. And so when you sit on it, your pelvis tilts forward, and sometimes the back of the block rises up a little bit. So now my hips are elevated, my knees are heading more towards the floor, and this sitting position feels pretty comfortable. We can also use a cork block for sitting. It's a little different experience, it's a little harder, but we can elevate higher, and that feels pretty good. But this is where you could also grab your blanket. So if you didn't have a bolster and you wanted to sit higher, use your blanket, decide how high for the fold, how thick you'd like it. Put your blanket on your block. Oh, this feels a whole lot better. I think I could sit here a lot longer. So a word about cork blocks. They are very dense, they're fairly heavy, and they're large. One thing to note, if you have cork blocks at home and you have pets that like to chew, I don't know if you can see that, my dog thinks my cork block is a great snack. So beware of maybe dogs, rabbits, guinea pigs getting a hold of these and chewing on them. Quite tasty. So the next thing we can use our blocks for is supporting the knees. Sometimes we're sitting and I'm tight in the hips, or for whatever reason my knees aren't going down to where I'd like them to be, or I feel a lot of tension in my hips to sit here. I can either use the foam block, one or two depending on how it's feeling today, tuck it underneath the thigh or underneath the knees, and give your knees a place to land. You can do the same thing with your cork block. And you can take it to the height that you need. And of course, at the same time, you could be sitting on your block and have your knees supported. And then all of a sudden, the act of sitting cross-legged isn't quite so uncomfortable or unreasonable to the body. We always want to use our props to support the body, to help bring the body to the pose. We're not trying to force a pose on the body. We want to give the body the support that it needs so it can move and settle to be whatever pose we need to be in. Another thing we can use our blocks for is building up the floor. And so what I mean by that is sometimes when we're coming into a twist, for example, I'm reaching behind me and maybe my arms in relation to my body are shorter. Maybe I have a shoulder injury. Maybe something's just not feeling right today. So putting my hand on the floor is really uncomfortable and I can't get to where I want to be. I can grab either one of my blocks, bring it behind me. Now I have a place for my hand to land. And now I can sit taller, it's softer in my shoulder, and I can twist. And when I go to the other side, I just slide the block around and twist. The great thing about these small props, very portable, very easy to move around as we move through our practice. Let's talk about kneeling. Not everybody's favorite place to be. Often puts a lot of stress on the knees and also on the tops of the feet. So this is where a blanket can also come in handy. And there are lots of ways to use your props to kneel. So when we come around into a kneeling position, we might try it and think, oh, tops of my feet really aren't happy. So you can always curl your toes under, but sometimes that's a lot of strain on the toes after a while. You could grab your blanket, again, decide how high of a fold you need. Sit back. Tops of the feet are on the blanket. Much better, just a little more cushioning. You could also take a block or two and tuck it from the calf to the back of the thigh. Sit under it that way. You can add as many as you need. There's a little more pressure on my heels, but the weight is very evenly distributed and my knees have no stress at all. You can also take the block and tuck it between the knees so that when you're sitting, now your seat is supported. And again, less stress on the knees and the tops of the feet. And you can also use a cork block for that as well. Again, cork block's a little harder, so you could put your blanket on top if that feels better. From here, we can move into a child's pose and have our block help us out there as well. So we come forward into a child's pose, and our instructor has suggested that we bring our arms forward on the floor. So I lower my body down, and I'm stretching forward, and it's like, oh, this is really hard on my shoulders. There's a lot of drag. So what I can do, and again, choose what works best for you. Take a block, or if you have two blocks, great. If not, just turn one block sideways. Now, again, I've built up the floor, and I have somewhere for my hands to land. And if I notice that I don't like my neck hanging, grab your cork block or a blanket and rest your forehead. This will also work for another positioning of the arms in a child's pose, where we bring our palms in prayer over the top of the head. So now I have somewhere for my elbows to rest. For is maybe we need them for knee support in a tabletop. So useful if you have two, but again, if you don't have a block, use your blanket. So your knees are a little higher, so you might want to curl your toes under, but it gives a nice stretch to those toes, to the bottoms of the feet. And you might notice your spine feels a little different. You're a little more flat. The next thing we can use them for is everybody's favorite pose, pigeon. So when we come into a pigeon pose, we start in our tabletop, and maybe you have a block under your knee. I'm going to slide, I'll do my left knee forward, my right leg is back. Now this is a pose that's really comfortable for me, but it might not be your experience, and you might be feeling a lot of tension in here, and you're kind of listing towards the earth, and it just doesn't feel comfortable. It's tugging on the right hip. So again, take your block. Maybe you take two blocks. Maybe it's a block and a blanket. 2 blocks is too high for me. But I can take a block, tuck it under my hip, and now my pelvis feels more stable. It's got some support because I've given my body somewhere to land. I could use my cork block to rest my forehead. So when you're in your pigeon pose, get creative. Where do you need support in the body? Maybe it's not underneath the hip. Maybe it's the arms. Or maybe you just pull out all the stops. And now, for the first time in a very long time, this pose actually feels really comfortable, and it's like it's doing a benefit. So another thing we can use our blocks for is for squatting. So like kneeling, a lot of people aren't crazy about a squat because again, it's a lot of stress on the knees and the feet. So when you come into a squat, my feet land on the ground, but maybe yours don't. Maybe your squat looks more like this, and it feels really unstable, and it's too much stress. I just don't feel like this is a great place for me to be. Grab your foam block, 1 or 2 depending. Tuck it underneath your heels. So now, again, I've built the floor up. My feet are completely supported and I feel much more stable. And I have way more balance. You can also either use your foam blocks or your cork block. And when you come into your squat, maybe you put your seat on the block. So my feet are on the floor. I am in a squat, but it's taken off a lot of the pressure and I have much better balance. So I'm able to stay here a little bit longer and get all the benefits of a squat. Moving up a little higher to our standing poses, we can use our block or blocks to assist a forward fold. So we're starting in our standing position, reaching those arms up, giving a really good stretch, and we fold forward. And oh, it's a stiff morning, or this is where my forward fold is right now. Not going any farther, and that's okay. But sometimes our arms need a little more support and we want to feel a little more stable in the legs. And I want to decrease the stress in my hamstrings. So I bend my knees a little bit, grab my blocks, have them underneath my shoulders. Now I can sink down and begin to work on my forward fold. And over time, and time could be a week, a month, a day, a year, 60 years, it doesn't matter. But eventually, maybe I can fold a little more and a little more. Remembering that every day is different. So your poses will feel different day by day, and we never judge or compare what happened yesterday with what's happening today. We can also use our blocks to help us in a lunge. So if you have tender knees, this is a good time you can use your foam block or your blanket. Tuck it underneath. You can step a foot forward. And then again, you can have your blocks beside your foot to support your hands wherever you need to be. Maybe it helps you feel much more steady and stable in your high lunge. We can also use it in a couple of standing poses like triangle. So when I come into triangle pose, I have my feet wide, my knees are straight, and I'm reaching over. And maybe I can reach my toes, and this pose is fantastic. But what if my hamstrings are really tight, or my shoulders are sore, or, it's just not, it's one of those days things aren't working, or we're new to the pose, and we haven't quite figured out, the body hasn't learned, that muscle memory hasn't developed yet. Take your block, and then we reach, and we tip, and we rest our hand on the block. Now I have somewhere very stable to support myself. And I can reach my top hand to the sky and my bottom hand towards the floor, stretching and working. You can also use your block for a really fun balance pose. We'll see how this works today. So we're going to start in a split leg, not too far distance between the feet. I'm going to fold forward. I'm going to place my right hand on the block, and the block is just ahead of my toes. Lifting up, reaching. This is where you're building the floor up to meet you where you're at. So this might be your pose. Maybe it's on a lower level. Maybe you don't need the block at all. But a block is a really nice place to start, to experiment, to give you that sense of balance, of feeling secure and stable. It's kind of like training wheels on a bike. When we're first learning to ride a bike, we put those training wheels on. So it gives us that sense of stability. We can figure out what our balance is, and then we take the training wheels off. So taking the training wheels off with a block would be moving from high, medium, low, and then maybe eventually no block at all. A couple more things we can do when we're seated. This is a fun one to help with the hips. So this is a cobbler's pose or Baddha Konasana, butterfly. My foot soles are together and my knees are open. And I'm getting a nice opening in my hips. I can use my cork block, or you could, no, I wouldn't use a foam block. They're a bit too big when we get moving. I'm going to take this skinny side and put it between my feet. So cork blocks are about a size 8, a women's size 8, because that's the size of my foot and it fits quite nicely on this block. So I'm opening my hips really gradually. So I might hang out here for a little while and I'll take it out and stretch out my legs. And then I'm going to move to the medium and put that down and see how that feels. Every time we do it, it's a little different experience. And then the last one you can do is turn your block the long way. So this is a really short distance. So if you have longer feet, you might actually want to grab 2 blocks so it's a little more comfortable. And now I'm hugging this wide distance, so really changing what's going on in my pelvis. And if you've never tried it before, I encourage you to do that. It's a very different experience. You can also use your cork block or 2 foam blocks in your seated forward fold. So let's switch. Take your 2 blocks, tuck them between the thighs, the knees, so you're giving them a squeeze. Your feet are flat. And what this does is you're squeezing into the block is it helps you activate those inner thigh muscles. So you're really getting strong in your legs and you can sit up taller, activating into your feet. If you really wanted to make this something, have your strap around the bottom of your feet and really work your forward fold. I don't have a strap handy, but we can pretend. So however you like your forward fold to look. I'm really working now much more on my legs. I'm trying to find that strong foundation. And then we release. It's a good workout. You could also do that same thing standing. There are many other ways you can use blocks. This is just a few ideas to encourage you to play and to not be afraid to use props. Often we have this idea that, oh, props are a sign of weakness or that I can't do it. Sometimes it is a sign that we can't do the pose. It's not available to us right now, and we need to work at getting to where we need to be in that pose. And props, whether it's a block, a blanket, or a bolster, a strap, or all of them, are very, very helpful. Doesn't mean we'll be using them all the time or we'll need them all the time, but when they're there, we can use them and the body will feel so much better for it.